Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Sarah Rasmi, and I'm a licensed psychologist, the founder of Thrive Wellbeing Center, and an assistant professor of practice at the American University of Sharjah. And I'm here today to talk to you about how we can manage our relationships during this tricky time. Now, before we get started talking about what relationships are and some of the things that we can do to improve our relationships and tackle some of the tricky patches that many of us are probably facing at the moment, I just wanted to take a second to remind all of you, and let some of you know if you don't already know, that today is World Health Day. And I think it's very, very, very important that we all take a minute to appreciate and acknowledge all of the frontline workers who are putting in so much time, energy, resources, and making so many sacrifices to try to keep us safe. So when we talk about health on World Health Day and more broadly, a lot of the time what we end up doing is thinking about physical health. And that makes a lot of sense. But it's also important for us to remember that our health is comprised of both physical and also psychological and emotional components. Okay? So when it comes to our psychological health, what we need to remember is that at the core of our well-being is our relationships. Many of you are probably familiar with the Harvard study of adult development. It's the longest running study of all time, and it followed people for more than 75 years. And over the course of this study, it's my dog, over the course of this study, they were looking at the things that make us happy and some of the risk factors. And when it comes to the things that make us happy and improve our well-being, the key driver of that was our social relationships. And actually what was also discovered is that social isolation can be problematic. And so it's especially important for us to talk about social relationships, given that it's World Health Day, but also because we are living in changing, uncertain, and evolving conditions, okay? And a lot of us, hopefully all of us, are practicing physical distancing. That's why I've got my dog barking here, because I'm speaking to you from my home rather than from the clinic or from the office. So we're practicing physical distancing, which means that we're finding ourselves quite socially disconnected, a lot of us, from other people, but we're also finding ourselves spending a lot of time with those who are close to us, the people who live in our households. And so one of the things that people have been approaching me about lately is whether or not I think that this is going to be good for couples, or if I think that it's going to be bad for couples. And I think that really it depends. We have an opportunity right now, when we're living under the same roof and spending so much more time together, to really reconnect and repair our relationships. But at the same time, because we're at home, it can also give us more opportunities and potential for conflict. So it can really go in either direction. And what I really want to do today is talk to you about some of the things that we know are good for relationships, as well as some of the things that we know are problematic, and some of the strategies and suggestions that we can use to overcome those problematic and difficult situations. So when we talk about a relationship, what is a relationship? What constitutes a good relationship? And what is love? Does anyone have any guesses or ideas? What constitutes love, and what are the key components of a strong relationship? Hello. Okay, so while some of you are brainstorming and hopefully sharing some of your ideas, I'm going to tell you that from a social psychological perspective, there are a lot of different ways that we can conceptualize love. So I see here that a couple of people have mentioned both understanding and respect, as well as acceptance. We've got trust, care. Those are all really important aspects of love. So there are different formulations of love. One of the ones that I often teach my university students is a three-part approach to love. And when it comes to love, under this formulation, we've got friendship, we've got commitment, and we've got passion. Now, obviously, those things can ebb and flow depending on where we are at in our relationship, but those are three really important aspects of love and what constitute a healthy relationship. Now, what I want to do is take a few minutes to talk to you about a theory that we call the sound relationship house theory. And this is a theory that was developed by two psychologists and researchers that are named Drs. John and Julie Gottman. I imagine that many of you watching this are familiar with the Gottmans because they are world-renowned and they're leading experts in their field. So they've been doing this work for more than 40 years. And one of the things that I think is really cool about the Gottmans is that a lot of the research that they've conducted has taken place in a laboratory that they've created with the nickname the Love Lab. And so what happens in the Love Lab is that it's an apartment, it's set up, it's fully functioning with the addition of cameras and microphones everywhere. And so couples, especially new couples, will sign up for this Love Lab, and they will go and they will stay there for a night or two, sometimes longer, and go through their day and their relationship sort of interacting as if they were at home. And so what the Gottmans would do and are doing is collecting all of this footage and paying attention to what they think are signs of a healthy relationship and signs that are more problematic. Now, I mentioned to you a little while ago that the Gottmans have been doing this research for 40 years. So one of the cool things that they've been able to do is develop this theory based on the results of their Love Lab and other experimental studies, and then use it to predict whether they think a couple is going to last, if their relationship is going to persist, or if the couple's relationship is likely to end up in separation or divorce. And because they've been doing it for 40 years, they're able to actually check if their guesses are correct. And what we know is that based on their research, they're able to predict with over a 90% correct rate. I got distracted by this message saying I'm Professor Tim's student. Hi, hi, thanks for tuning in. So they're correct more than 90% of the time, okay? So let's take a look now at what they've decided constitutes a sound relationship house. And what I really want you to know and understand is that this is grounded in psychological science. So we're going to go through the theory, and I'm also going to share with you some of the strategies and techniques that they use to help repair and reconnect relationships. And a lot of these are the skills and techniques that I use with the couples that I work with and see it thrive. So here is a little handout. Okay, this is the sound relationship house. It is in the form and shape of a house. So we've got two pillars that are the boundaries of the relationship. On one side, we have trust, which is something that so many of you were able to identify a little bit earlier when I asked you what you thought constituted a sound relationship. And on the other side, we have commitment. So hopefully by now, you're starting to recognize that even though there are lots of different ways to think about love and relationships, there are also a lot of common threads. So we've got trust and commitment that are really, really, really important, right? They're pillars and they're boundaries of a good relationship. Then we have all of the different levels of the sound relationship house. So I'm going to start from the top and work my way up. The first three levels of the sound relationship house, according to Drs. John and Julie Gottman, constitute the relationship's friendship system. So again, hopefully you're seeing that there's a bit of an overlap here. So we need to have a strong friendship in order to have a strong relationship. Now, what does a strong friendship consist of? Well, the first thing, the very first level, according to this theory, is love maps. And love maps has to do with our knowledge of our partner. So for those of you who are in a relationship at the moment, and those of you who have been in a relationship before, you probably know that we spend the first chunk of our relationship really getting to know one another. We are trying to acquire knowledge. We approach one another with curiosity, with interest. We have so many questions about who the other person is, their history, key moments, what are their likes, their dislikes, their attitudes, their preferences. We want to know so many things about the other person, and we're interested. We listen with awe, and over time we build our knowledge base of our partner. The thing that happens though is that over the course of our relationship, we do that less and less and less. And the other thing that happens is that we start to be guided by our assumptions. A lot of the couples that come in to see me, when we're going through their relationship history, their relationship challenges, I will walk them through this sound relationship house, and I'll ask them, where do you think you fall on this? Do you think that this level of the house is a strength, a challenge, or neither? And I have to say that a lot of the time, people will say to me that love maps is a challenge, and they will usually back that up by saying, I feel like my partner doesn't know me, and I feel like I don't know my partner anymore. There is so much that has developed, so much that has changed, and we just don't really talk anymore. And I get that, you know, as our relationship progresses, as we adjust to changing circumstances, as we transition to becoming new parents, as our careers take off, all of our interests, our obligations, we're pulled in so many different directions. And sometimes one of the things that we let go of is that deep connection and that knowledge acquisition. So one of the things that we need to do is we need to try to bring that back. So I'm going to show you something that you can do in order to try to bring that back if you're in a relationship. And I do want to say that we're talking about this in the context of romantic relationships, but the strategies and the tips that I'm sharing with you are things that you can apply to other close interpersonal relationships. So I'm going to pull out from my little box here. Of course, it's at the very bottom. These are cards, okay? So I have the clinician's toolbox, so I have the hard copy of these, but you can also access these by searching for them online, and you can also download an application called Gottman. So just search in the App Store for Gottman, and you will find an icon that looks like this map with a heart. Click on it and download it, and all of the card decks, including some of the ones I'm going to look at with you today, as well as some other ones, can be found there. And I recommend that all of you have a look at these because they're really great, okay? So love maps is actually a really fun exercise, and I think that now that we're at home and we have more opportunity, a lot of us, to spend time with our partner, it's a good idea to try to carve out some deliberate time where we sit, we talk, we connect. I know a lot of people are feeling quite discouraged because the date nights that you might have had before outside of the house are no longer possible, but we can still bring some of that excitement and connection time within the house. So usually what I recommend to people who are housebound is that they set aside some time, so maybe once a week, where they say to one another, okay, you and I are going to have a date night, and that date night, for example, is going to consist of the two of us sitting together and having a meal together. We're going to wait until the kids go to sleep. We're going to cook something really nice that maybe we don't normally prepare. We're going to set some candles maybe. We're going to use the nice plates that we don't always bring out, and we're going to try to make it really special, and we're going to put away all of our distractions. And by the way, putting away distractions is really important because what we're seeing in psychological research, as I'm sure most of you know and can guess, is that when we are distracted, usually by our digital devices, it's a signal to our partner, the people who are with us, that we're not really interested. So it's really important that we ditch the devices, don't have them on the table, because even having them on a table is a signal that this device has a seat in our relationship and sit and connect. So what do we do? What do we talk about? A lot of times couples will say that. Well, I don't know. What are we going to talk about? Let's talk about the bills and the kids and the job and the news. And that's all great, but it's also important to talk about yourselves and ask about each other. So these cards are really, really helpful for that. So love maps is an exercise. What happens using either the physical cards or the application is that you and your partner flick through them and you basically quiz each other. You want to look at it as an opportunity to learn more, not as an opportunity to see which one of you knows the other person better. And this is a really critical point because we want this to be a beneficial exercise and not something that adds conflict, discord, tension, pressure, or any other negative element to your interaction. So let's say that I'm here with my partner and I'm looking through the deck of cards and I get to, this is the one that I randomly found myself on, what is one of your partner's favorite books? So I know that, this is true, I know that my partner likes an author named Dean Koontz, and I know that because we have a lot of his books, and some titles we have multiple copies. And so if I was playing this game with him, I would say, your favorite author is Dean Koontz. And he would either say, yes, that's correct. And what I would probably do to deepen that interaction is say something along the lines of, why don't you tell me a little bit about your favorite book and why it's meaningful to you? And so I'm able to, even though I knew the answer to the question, I'm able to find out more information. It's Gottman, Gottman. Some people have trouble finding it on the iTunes store. It depends on where your account is based. If you're not able to find it, then what I suggest you do is go to the Gottman Institute website, which has a ton of resources. And if you Google it, you'll probably also find some of the sample questions as well. Okay, so that's what we do. Let's say I didn't know, I had no idea, and I just guessed something and it was totally wrong. Hopefully he would respond to me with kindness and say, you know what, nice guess, but actually that's not my favorite book, this is my favorite book. And then I would ask again the deepening question, why is it your favorite, etc., etc., etc. So this is one of the exercises that we can do, and it's fun. A lot of the couples that I see will do this after our sessions as a way to kind of increase positivity in the relationship, and I think that it's really important. The topic of this session is managing relationships during this COVID-19 situation, and what we're talking about is how we can increase positivity, like using the Love Maps exercise that I talked about, as well as reducing negativity, and I'm going to get to that in a little while. So Love Maps, that's one of the things that we can do. Another one that's a little bit deeper, a little bit less light, is this deck of cards called Open-Ended Questions. And so I'm just going to go to a random one. And here you go. You just ask the question on the card. It's an open-ended question, as you probably could guess, given the fact that the deck is called Open-Ended Questions. And the card that I arrived on is, if you could live in another country, which would you pick and why? So that's an opportunity to find out about another place that might be interesting to our partner, but more importantly than identifying the place, it might enable us to understand what factors and elements are important to a person in feeling safe and secure and at home. So it can open up some really interesting and deep conversations. Here's another one. If you could experience being any other person for 24 hours, who would you pick and why? So this is fun as well. And the questions, again, because they're open-ended, we can go quite deep with them. And both of these things serve to allow us to build our love maps, to deepen our knowledge of our partner. So a minute ago, when somebody joined and asked what's the topic of the session, I said, It's about relationships and about building positivity and decreasing negativity. Now, if you recall, I said that the Gottmans have done a whole host of research. I would choose to live in the UAE too. But the Gottmans have done a whole host of research, and as part of the research that they've done, they identified that relationships that are the most successful are those with a high positive to negative interaction ratio. The ratio that they identified specifically is 5-to-1. And so what that means is the couples who do well, the couples most likely to persist and last over time, are those that have 5 positive interactions for every 1 negative interaction. So I always say this, I'm not suggesting that we need to walk around the house with a notebook or a clipboard and really count and pay attention to the number of good and bad interactions that we're having. We really need to understand what the message behind this is. The message behind this is that conflict can be okay. It can even be good, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. It only becomes problematic when it's mismanaged, okay? One of the things that enables us to manage conflict more effectively is when we have a buffer, okay? So if we feel like most of the time when we interact with our partner, it's a positive and a nice experience, that gives us the ability to navigate some of the trickier discussions. So bear that in mind. And like I said, building love maps, taking this opportunity during this time where we have a lot more access to our partners to deepen our knowledge is something that we can all benefit from, whether we think we're in a really good place in our relationship or whether we think that our relationship needs work. Okay? Now, the next one, another element of the friendship system, is sharing fondness and admiration. Sharing fondness and admiration basically means that we outwardly appreciate and express affection towards our partner. Again, this is something that we have a tendency to do quite a lot of at the beginning of our relationship, and it's something that kind of gives a little bit over time. And what ends up happening is that partners start to feel taken for granted. They start to feel like, I'm doing this for my husband or my wife or whoever I'm in a relationship with, and he or she doesn't see it and doesn't care. So why am I even bothering? And it's not that they don't see it or don't care. It's just we've fallen out of the habit and the practice of expressing that fondness and admiration. So one of the things that I suggest, again, this is for romantic relationships, but it also applies and works wonders for other close relationships, is deliberately carving out time to express how we feel and that we appreciate our partner. So usually, I suggest one of 2 interventions. The first one is that every night, and I think it's a nice note to kind of fall asleep on and wrap up the day on, but every night, setting aside 5 minutes with your partner to just say, hey, thank you for doing, saying, being this today, okay? It's very, very important. But in addition to saying thank you, and I appreciate this thing about you, we have to explain to them why. What's the emotional impact? So let me give you an example. Let's say that at the end of a day, I want to tell my partner, thank you for making me a coffee. And I really love coffee, so that's something that I would probably say on many days, okay? So if I just say, hey, thanks for the coffee, that's not really having the impact that we're looking for. But the act of having a partner bring us coffee, something that we love, something that energizes us, symbolizes a lot of things. It symbolizes that they see us, they understand us, and they're caring for us. So if I said to my partner, rather than, hey, thanks for the coffee, I just want to thank you for bringing me that coffee today. It made me feel understood, it made me feel cared for, and it made me feel loved, okay? That's something that is probably going to resonate with our partner more. And when it resonates with our partner more, they're probably going to be more likely to repeat that action. And ultimately, if it's something we like, we want them to repeat it. So that's a good strategy. Now, there's another important aspect of this exercise, and it's something that we call mirroring. And mirroring basically means holding up a mirror, reflecting back to our partner what they said to us. So the reason we do this, the reason we repeat back to our partner the thing that they said to us, is because it forces us to slow down and actively listen. All of you who are in a relationship, romantic or otherwise, know that assumptions do sometimes take over. And just like we assume that we know our partner, over time, a lot of times we assume that we know what they're saying and what they're thinking. And it gives us it makes us miss an opportunity to really hear them and to learn something. So the way the exercise would go is you would say, "Thank you for the coffee. It made me feel understood, cared for, and loved." And then the partner would say, "You appreciate that I made you coffee because making you coffee made you feel loved, appreciated, and understood." Then I would say, "Yes, that's right." And then the partner would say, "One thing I appreciated about you today is XYZ, and it made me feel ABC." And then I end up mirroring it back. And it's a wonderful communication tool because, again, it forces us to slow down and to listen. And that's something that we really need to do. It makes people feel heard, and it makes people feel understood, and it makes people feel validated. So this is one of the exercises that I love to recommend to people who are trying to improve and boost the positivity in the relationship, especially because we know that positivity buffers some of the tricky situations and it feels really good. I'm seeing a comment here saying everyone has a bad mood and not all have the same control. Okay, so I'm definitely going to address that in a few minutes when we talk about negative sentiment override and we talk about conflict management. So this is one of the activities that I suggest, and most of the time when I ask couples to integrate this into their daily routine, they really like it because it's a time to just sit together, appreciate and be appreciated, and it's a nice experience. It's one that allows us to feel connected and valued. Okay? The other one that I suggest as well is for improving admiration. And so an exercise that you can do maybe again on a date night in is to sit with your partner and take turns identifying a few qualities that the other person has that you admire. When I say a few qualities, it's very important that those qualities that we discuss are qualities that relate to how our partner is as a partner, not how they are as a parent, not how they are as a child, a sibling, a career person, a neighbor, whatever. It's how they relate to us. So we come up with a couple of qualities that we really admire in our partner, and we share them with our partner. And one of the things that's really important is when we share it with our partner, we don't just say, "Oh, I really appreciate you and you're awesome because you're funny." Okay? What we do is we say, "One of the qualities that I really admire about you is that you're a funny person. And I admire that because, for example, even in difficult situations, you know how to lighten the mood, and I find that really comforting and really reassuring." For example, remember last week when I was feeling really worried about what was happening and the situation, you told me this joke and it brought a smile to my face and some temporary relief. So that's what I mean about sharing the quality and backing it up with an anecdote. Again, this is something we take turns doing, and this is something we like. And usually when I do it in the context of couples therapy, people are beaming because sometimes they haven't heard their partner say to them for a while, that, hey, this is something I really love about you. Sometimes couples discover qualities about themselves that they didn't know that the other person admired, and that can be really, 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 really nice. I see a comment here saying the tone of voice, the setting, and timing are very important factors. Absolutely. Very, very important. And someone else is saying, okay, same person, it's helpful to write down my feelings before expressing them out loud. That can be really helpful as well. Sometimes people will find that by writing it out, you kind of get the ideas out there, and you can, synthesize and maybe polish them up and formulate them in a way that is going to be more effectively received. For other people, it's different. But absolutely, timing, setting, and tone are essential. So that's another exercise that I suggest. So try the love maps, try the open-ended questions, try expressing the appreciation every day, and try the admiration traits exercise. I think those are going to be really, really helpful and hopefully really fun too. So those are the two aspects of the friendship system. Hello. The third aspect of the friendship system is what we call turning away or turning towards. Okay? So basically, the way that we think about this is what happens in our relationship when our partner, let's say, snaps or is a little bit irritable. No, sorry, that's the negative sentiment override. I'm getting ahead of myself as an extension of what we're talking about. Going back to turning towards versus turning away, which feeds into the part that I had just started discussing. Turning towards is what we do when somebody makes an emotional bid for connection. So what ends up happening is that during the course of the day, when we're in a relationship with somebody, they will try to connect with us. And that might be a very deep connection, and that might be something like, hey, did you see this article that came out in the newspaper today? It might be just sort of a basic bit of chit chat. So what do we do when our partner tries to emotionally connect with us? Do we go with it? Do we acknowledge them? Do we engage in that conversation? Or do we ignore them? Which one do you think is better? Of course, it's better for us to turn towards our partner who's trying to connect with us. So I want you all to keep this in mind. When someone tries to emotionally connect with you, acknowledge and engage with them. It's important, though, to remember that I'm not saying we have to drop everything that we're doing to cater to our partner because our partner wants to engage with us in that moment. Let's say now we're working from home, and let's say me or you is sitting working on schoolwork, right? Working on schoolwork, working on whatever it is that you need to do, and your partner comes in and goes, hey, did you see this article? You don't have to drop everything you're doing to hear all of the details just because your partner wants to talk in that moment. But there's still a way to accept that bid for connection. And it looks like this. Someone comes in, I would turn towards and say, you know what? That sounds really, really interesting, and I would love to hear all about it. I'm in the middle of something right now, but in a couple of hours, I will be able to give you the attention that this deserves. So I'm still able to do what it is that I need to do and prioritize what it is that I need to prioritize while still making my partner feel heard and valued. I'm seeing a comment here about feeling robotic. And you know what? So many people will say this. And it makes sense that it feels robotic. The reason that a lot of these things feel robotic is because they signify a massive shift in your relationship, right? And if you're noticing that your relationship is one that isn't really full of admiration, appreciation, and positivity, then despite how uncomfortable it might seem to feel like you're kind of engaging in a mechanical and robotic way, you are developing a new set of skills on how to communicate with one another, and over time it's going to feel more natural. So it's a sign that you're making a change, and like with anything, it becomes more comfortable over time. So I definitely hear you, but what I usually suggest to people, and this is probably the scientist in me, is just give things a try. Give things a try for a fixed period of time and pay attention to how the experience is for you. Go and do these exercises and techniques for a week, okay? And see how you feel. Do you feel more connected, less connected, as connected? And then based on that, you can decide how to adjust and how to proceed. But my guess is that most of you who do these things over the course of a week or longer will not only feel less robotic, but will also feel more satisfied in your relationship. So that's really, really important. Okay? So that's turning towards versus turning away. Now, a few minutes ago, when I got a little bit ahead of myself, I was talking about something that we call the positive perspective versus negative sentiment override. So if you've been with me from the beginning, I mentioned that a good relationship consists of knowing our partner, consists of appreciating and being appreciated by our partner, expressing admiration and receiving admiration from our partner, and turning towards our partner when they try to emotionally engage with us. Those three things are what we call the friendship system, and they feed into the fourth level, which is called the positive perspective. If you have a strong relationship with someone, you're more likely to give them the benefit of the doubt. Whereas if you have problems in your relationship, frustration, you feel disconnected, you feel unappreciated, then you're going to assume the worst. So in your relationship, do you tend to take the positive perspective, or are you in what we call negative sentiment override? So negative sentiment override versus the positive perspective, I'll give you a non-romantic example. This is something that I tell my students all the time, and I've been using this example for years. Let's say it's your birthday, and your birthday is something that's really significant to you, and your best friend forgets your birthday or can't come to your birthday party. Yes, you will probably be hurt, you will probably be disappointed, but because you have that strong relationship, you will be able to overcome and to forgive that, and you might even come up with an excuse or accept whatever excuse your best friend gives you. If it's somebody you don't like imagine that person in your circle that is closer to everybody else and not really that close to you, and you don't really vibe very well, and they don't come to your birthday and they give you the exact same excuse. Are you going to let it go and accept it in the same way? Of course not, right? That's the difference between positive perspective and negative sentiment override. So one of the things that we need to do is we need to try to remember that what we look for is what we see. So if I'm going to look for examples and indications that my partner's a jerk, I will find those examples and indications. If I want to see the goodness in my partner, I will see the goodness. So sometimes what we need to do is remind ourselves, right, that I have a tendency to assume the worst, and before I do that, I'm going to try to find the good in this interaction and the good in my partner. That's really, really important. Now, the next level is about managing conflict, and this constitutes a very significant portion of a relationship. We've spoken so far about increasing positivity. Now we want to talk about decreasing negativity. So I alluded earlier in this segment to the fact that conflict is not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes people will say to me, oh, I know this couple and they never fight. Their relationship is amazing. And I find that actually really interesting, because to me, if there's no tension and no disagreement in a relationship, it probably means you're not going very deep and it's quite superficial, right? So conflict is something that we should all have to an extent, but we need to manage it and resolve it in an effective way. And that can be really challenging. So I'm going to walk you through some of the things that we have a tendency to do, and I'm going to share with you some strategies on how to manage it. When we were talking at the very beginning of this segment about the challenges and the opportunities that we have now that we are all at home and practicing physical distancing and having more opportunity to connect, but also to argue with our partner, it's important to bear these points in mind. So when it comes to conflict, there are 4 things that the Gottmans call the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Very interesting name. So they have these 4 horsemen, and these are considered the things that are very problematic in a relationship and the things that we want to avoid. Now, let me explain to you how they work. The first horseman, the first thing that's problematic in a relationship is criticism. You're saying, good, we are still single, but pay attention, because when I describe these things, you're probably going to recognize some of the communication patterns that you or people close to you might be adopting, and you will probably be able to connect with some of the frustrations that can result from these communication styles. So the first one is criticism, and criticism is exactly what it sounds like. It's pointing out things that are negative about the other person, character, personality flaws, all that sort of stuff. Now, what happens when we're criticized? Usually, when we're criticized, we do the second horseman, and that is become defensive. Defensiveness works in a couple of different ways. One of the ways that defensiveness works is we will say, no, you're wrong, and that's ridiculous. And the other way that we can be defensive is say, oh, me? Look at you. All right? And this is really quite problematic. And a lot of times people get sort of sucked into this dynamic of trying to prove to the other person who's worse and who's wrong. And if you've ever experienced tension or conflict in a relationship that's romantic or otherwise, you probably realize that when it's heated and when we get to that point, we're not persuading anybody. We're not in a place where we want to be persuaded, and we're not in a place where we can persuade. So this is one of the things that can happen. The third horseman is called, exactly, 2 wrongs don't make a right. The third horseman is called contempt. And contempt is like criticism, it's just extra nasty. So not just is it talking about a personality or a flaw or a character issue, it's sarcastic, it's saying, I'm so much better than you, it's rolling our eyes when we speak, and that's really problematic as well. This is actually the most dangerous and problematic of the 4 horsemen, the one that is most likely to predict the demise, the end of a relationship. So we have to be very mindful of not engaging in contemptuous forms of communication. Then we have the last horseman, and it's what we call stonewalling, right? It's when we put up a wall. Some of you watching this might be like that, and some of you might be in a relationship with someone like that, whether it's romantic or otherwise. And stonewalling is when you're talking to someone and all of a sudden they shut down. And it can be really infuriating for the person on the other side, because it looks like this person you're speaking with doesn't care. But it's far from that. Usually what's happening is on the inside, there's so much going on, and the way that they manage it is to close up. And a lot of this has to do with their attachment style, the way that they formed an emotional bond with their caregiver, and how it's being modeled in their romantic relationship. So I'll try to talk about that in a few minutes if we've got some time. But now I just want to tell you what we can do to manage and avoid these horsemen. When it comes to criticism and contempt, again, criticism and contempt, they come from a need. They just come out in a really bad way. So I'll use an example that I always use. Let's say that I'm coming home, or well, we're not coming home anymore. Let's say I'm coming downstairs and I go into the kitchen and I find cups and dishes everywhere. And for me, this is really infuriating. If I'm going to engage in criticism or contempt, I'm probably going to say something like, what is wrong with you? You're so filthy. You always do this. And immediately, the partner is going to get defensive and either say, that's not true, I don't always do this, why are you always exaggerating, just leave me alone, and then all of a sudden, this interaction has escalated. What I'm actually trying to express when I come down and say, what is wrong with you, you're so filthy, is I'm feeling really frustrated and really overwhelmed, and what I need from you is to keep the kitchen tidy. So if I said that, or if you said that, or if anyone says that to a partner, I feel frustrated, overwhelmed, sad, angry, disappointed, whatever the negative emotion is about this particular thing, and I need you to do this to help me, our partner is much more likely to hear that and to give us what we need, because we're not telling them that they're terrible. We're saying, this is what I need from you. So next time you feel frustrated, try that. Now, if you're the one who has somebody coming at you and criticizing you, what we want to do to try to diffuse the situation is take a little bit of responsibility. So, in the example, I just said, why do you always do this? By the way, don't use always and never, because nothing is always and never true. And I realize that what I just said is sort of hypocritical, but it's important to remember, let's scrap the always and the never. But if I go and I say, what's wrong with you? You always do this. Immediately, my partner is thinking, no, I don't. I cleaned up yesterday. Here she is, always assuming the worst of me. But if the partner who is on the receiving end of that criticism is able to pause, breathe, and say, okay, she's feeling or he's feeling overwhelmed, frustrated, stressed about this. I know that I don't always do this, but I know I did it today. And they say, you know what, you're right. Today, I didn't clean up, I didn't keep it tidy. They're taking some level of responsibility. They're acknowledging the kernel of truth in what it is that you're saying. And usually when someone says, hey, yeah, you've got a point, immediately things start to diffuse. So those are two ways of managing conflict. The last way that is extremely important, and some of you said this earlier, is about timing. And it's about staying in touch and being in tune with how you feel. How many of you have entered into a conflict discussion when you have been so mad and your person that you're talking to has been so mad and you were able to resolve that conflict? Anybody? No. It doesn't happen, because you escalate, they escalate, you escalate, they escalate, and usually there's some kind of big blowout. So one of the things that we need to do is we need to come up with what we call a flooding plan. We need to practice physiological self-soothing. So what I suggest is when you're in a discussion and you're feeling yourself getting really frustrated, tune into that, reflect, introspect, and ask yourself, how am I feeling right now? On a scale of 1 to 10, how mad am I right now? And if you're really mad, don't continue the conversation, because it's not going to end well. Maybe you're feeling okay, but you can see your partner getting visibly agitated. Don't continue the conversation. What we do in that moment is we call a timeout. But the timeout has to follow and abide by certain conditions. First of all, the person needs to say the timeout in a way that has an element of what we call we-ness. So not me against you, you're so angry we need to take a break. No, it needs to be inclusive. So I would say something along the lines of, this conversation is not as productive as I think we would like it to be. Let's take a break and let's discuss it again in 2 hours. So not you versus me, it's us and we. We're on the same team. That's already a way to try to diffuse the situation. So that's one thing. The second thing is, when we ask for that timeout or that break, we need to have an endpoint, and the endpoint needs to be a minimum of 30 minutes and a maximum of 24 hours. Now, where do these numbers come from? If you've ever been so frustrated, right, 7, 8, 9, 10 out of 10 in a conversation, you probably noticed that your body was in what we call that fight or flight mode, right? Maybe your heart rate is accelerating. Maybe your breathing is quickening. Maybe your digestive system is acting up. You're physiologically aroused. It's your body's way of gearing you up to protect you from the imminent danger. Now, it's also the barrier to resolving the discussion successfully. So we need the break to be at least 30 minutes because that's the minimum amount of time that we need to calm down. So when we take that 30 minutes break as a minimum, we also need to go and do something that is relaxing to try to calm down. Okay? Why do I say that the break can be a maximum of 24 hours? Well, because after 24 hours, a lot of times people will say, oh, whatever, it's over, it's done. And then the issue that stemmed from somebody's needs goes unresolved and it snowballs, right? Most people who are in a relationship have conflict over perpetual problems. They argue about the same thing 87 to 90% of the time, according to the governments. So we sweep it under the rug today, and then in a week, 2 weeks, a month, it comes up again, and it's even more frustrating because it's another time that it has happened. So we need to make sure that it gets addressed. That's incredibly important. Now, this is the important bit too. We can't leave it open-ended because usually one person will say, I think we should take a break, and the other person, and you know if you're in a relationship like this, another person will say, no, I want to talk about it right now, right? And so the person who wants to address it right away is going to be sitting there waiting like, okay, he or she said that they would come back, right? When are they coming back? They're not coming back yet. What's going on? And then they aren't calming down. They're getting more frustrated. So we need to give that end point. So I suggest starting with maybe 2 hours. Say, let's talk about this again in 2 hours. We each go our separate ways, do our own thing, try to relax, come back together. Always come back together. One or both of you might still be feeling really agitated after those 2 hours. That's okay. Take another 2 hours and repeat the process. So the way that this works is notice when you're feeling frustrated, notice when your partner's feeling frustrated, and take a break. But when we take a break, the break needs to be between 20 to 30 minutes and 24 hours. We need to say what the break time is, and after that time we come together and we decide whether or not we're going to be, sorry, I got distracted by that. That's a very nice compliment. Thank you. I will definitely share my information in a second. But we come back together and we decide whether or not we're ready to talk about it. And if we are, we do. And if we're not, we postpone it again. So that's a really important way for us to try to manage conflict. Okay? I'm just going to say one of the things that people are really struggling with at the moment in their relationships is the fact that, again, we have so much more opportunity to be with our partners. We have a lot of time to be with our partners. And many of us who were working outside of the home and going outside of the home to just live are no longer doing those things, right? We're at home all the time. And regardless of how big or small your house is, it can start to feel very, very small. At the beginning of this discussion, we talked about elements of a good relationship. And one of the things that we also need to discuss is independence and interdependence. A strong relationship is one where our lives overlap, where we're connected, we're partners. At the same time, we can't be codependent. We can't be so linked that we don't have our own independent life in our space. What a lot of people are experiencing at the moment is feeling disconnected from themselves. And so one of the things that I think we really need to do during this period is that every day we carve out time where each one of us has the opportunity to get some breathing room, to do whatever you want, whether it's staring at a wall, dancing around your room, reading a book, drinking a cup of coffee without a child or somebody else sort of hanging over you. That time to just be, to be mindful, to be in the moment, and to reconnect with yourself. It's so important for our well-being, and our well-being in turn is so important for the well-being of those people who are around us. this really comes back to this idea of self-care and self-compassion. And a lot of times what happens is parents, caregivers, adults, sometimes not adults, just everybody, will fall into this trap of thinking, I should be doing this, I need to be doing that. And they push and push and push and push. And the last person on the list is you. And you're depleted, right? So we need to try to look after ourselves, because looking after ourselves rejuvenates us. It gives us energy. It makes us feel more connected to who we are. And with that energy and that connection to ourselves, it enables us to better connect with the people we care about. So if you can't do it for you, if you don't want to do it for yourself, do it for all of the people that you love. And one of the other things that I want to say, especially to the parents, but really everybody out there who's watching this, is these are unprecedented times. We're all living in a situation that we've never really experienced before. Things are changing rapidly. Uncertainty makes us feel very anxious. When we have children with this e-learning and all of that kind of stuff, we're wearing more and more hats. You know, you're a partner, you're a son, you're a daughter, you're a husband, you're a wife, you're a mother, you're a father, you're a friend, you're a neighbor, you're an employer, you're an employee. We've got all of these things going on. And when we have really strong, really high expectations on ourselves, it can be really overwhelming. So I want all of you to know that we are doing our best, and that's all we can do. And some of us have the tendency to aim for the sky and for perfection. Right now, we just need to get through every single day. That's really, really, really what's important. And we need to remember, nobody can do everything perfectly, especially when we're learning and managing and balancing so many new and different things at the same time. So please, in addition to trying to see your partner in a more positive light, giving them the positive perspective, reflect and apply that positive perspective to yourselves. Self-compassion is really, really, really important, especially now. So I'm just mindful of the time. I want to make sure that I'm able to effectively wrap up and save. I want to thank all of you who joined this live today. I hope that it was helpful. We talked about a lot of different strategies that we can use to build our positivity in our relationship, to reduce negativity in our relationship, the importance of slowing down and connecting with ourselves, the importance of having some self-compassion and practicing some self-kindness. So I hope that all of you take some of that and integrate what feels right and what feels good for you. And somebody had said before, and I'll just mention really briefly for those of you who weren't watching from the very, very beginning. Number one, if you missed my name is Dr. Sarah Rasmi. I'm a licensed psychologist. I founded Thrive Wellbeing Center, and I'm a professor of practice at the American University of Sharjah. But most importantly, today is World Health Day. So please shout out to all of the health heroes and all of the other people working on the front lines to ensure our safety and our well-being. And remember that in addition to physical health, psychological health is really important. And at the core of our psychological health is our relationships with other people, as well as our relationship with ourselves. So with that, I wish you all a wonderful evening. Thank you again for your time. Stay safe and be well.